Merit Kahn is a powerhouse keynote speaker, CEO of SELLect Sales Development, and a certified emotional intelligence expert. Author of two books, Myth Shift and Are You Open To? And playwright, producer, and performer of a one-woman inspiring comedy show called Who Chiseled That? The tale of a life unscripted, unstoppable, and unexpectedly funny, which is currently touring in the U.S. Get ready to laugh, learn, and level up with Merit. Merit, welcome. We are really excited to be speaking with you.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to be here, Mike.
Well, it's good to hear. It's good to hear. There's a lot of stuff in your bio and a lot of different things that you do. So if you meet someone new for the first time and they say, "Hey, Merritt, what do you do?" How do you answer that?
Well, I am a performer and I can be found on three different types of stages. So I keynote at conferences for leadership and sales events. And I perform my one-woman theater show in theaters across the country. And then you can check me out in a comedy club doing a stand-up set.
Very nice. And your bio mentions laughing, learning. Most people are going to say yes to those things and leveling up. So they're probably going to do that as well. Do you try to, when you are speaking or performing those different venues, do you try to encapsulate all of those things? Is it comedy, I want to just get laughs, or how do you balance all those things?
Well, that's a great question. In a comedy show, I really want you mostly laughing. And if you leave my set thinking something has opened your mind in a new way, that's fantastic. But mostly the job there is laughter. In my theater show, I want you to do a pretty balanced amount of both. I want you to be mostly entertained, but I also want you to have your heartstrings pulled just a little bit and have a good experience hearing some stories and a theatrical experience. Now, in my keynotes, that's where you really pull it all together. So I need to make sure that my audiences are learning something valuable that makes them think differently about their business or their lives, their leadership or their sales. But in order for those lessons to stick, I need to make sure that they're wrapped in humor so that people are engaged and they're enjoying the experience of being in my audience.
It's a very good answer. You mentioned humor there for multiple settings. Why do they like to laugh, and why does it work even if the topic is heavy or serious? Why do you feel that laughter kind of makes people lean in and want to learn more?
Well, there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, first of all, a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. Think of it like that, right? It's easier for us to hear difficult things if we can wrap it in something humorous. So I'm more likely to, or people in general are really more likely to lean in a little bit, to let their guard down if they can laugh a little bit. And really, laughter is the great equalizer, right? It's, comedians are the ones that can tackle difficult subjects in humorous ways and allow all of us to be open to seeing something in a new perspective.
That's a good answer. And I always find
Two
that
for two. I got two good answers. That's
yes,
good
they're good
stuff.
answers. Anybody, anytime that you can kind of take a serious subject, put, as you mentioned, the sugar, it makes me think, okay, a lot of thought has gone into this, because while I was expecting one thing, I'm getting that, but you've also been able to weave in something else that is somewhat relevant and I'm enjoying. So that makes sense. How did you figure out you were good at all of these different things?
Oh, wow. Okay. I think, I've always been a performer, right? Ever since I was a little girl, performing in plays in school, auditioning for Annie on Broadway, which I did not get, by the way. Still
Not
upset
yet.
about that.
Not yet.
Still bitter about that. But yeah, Broadway is still a possibility. But I think for me, that was a very natural thing. And the ability to make people laugh is truly a gift. And I didn't really start studying comedy until 2014. And once I took my very first comedy workshop and I had an opportunity to really experience what it felt like to have 300 people laughing at your original jokes. And that was quite different, because at that point I had already had, more than a decade on stages as a professional speaker, trainer, coach, consultant. And so I was no a stranger to an audience, but those audiences were there for my content. And so if I made them laugh, that was a nice bonus, but it wasn't the intention. It was very different from performing as a stand-up comedian, where if you're not making them laugh like every 7 seconds, you're not a very funny comedian. So it was a very different experience, and I learned a lot from that. And I think once you've really tasted what it is like to have an audience laugh at your original material, it's like, oh, I got to do this again.
So interesting there that the speaking part came first with a decade of experience, and then you walked onto that stage ready to tell jokes in kind of a different setting. Do you remember what it was like, what was going through your mind as you were stepping up? Were you thinking, I've got this because of the 10 years? You were like, this is going to be so different. I don't know how this is going to go. What was it like in your mind?
To be perfectly honest with you, I was probably just a little bit cocky when I took that
Okay.
stage, because I'm like, oh, stages, I got this, like, no problem. It was such a different experience. There's really nothing that compares to standing on a stand-up comedy stage. It was absolutely terrifying, and that is coming from somebody who had a healthy, successful career on stages. So yeah, it's absolutely terrifying.
Okay. Do you remember either more of the jokes that worked or the ones that did not, that you automatically scrapped the next time? What do you remember more of from that first set?
From that very first set, there's a couple jokes that I still do today, and that was, back in 2014. So I definitely remember those. I have successfully blocked out the jokes that didn't work
Good.
as well. But mostly what happens is jokes evolve. So I think one of the things that I've learned about business and relationships from comedy is that even when I thought a joke was fully baked and done, every time I would do that joke again, I would learn something from the audience's response, or I would change a way that I delivered it, or just even the length of a pause or the inflection of a word. And I would change the punchline or add a tag, or, there was some evolution of it. And I think that was one of the things I learned from comedy that I applied from business and teach my business audiences today is, don't be so stuck on something just because you've done it this way over and over and over again. You can still make it better. And sometimes what it takes to make something better is that collaboration. So that brings in, like, lessons on leadership and team and things like that, and ongoing education and training. And, there's always more of an evolution. And when you have an open mind and you bring that spirit of, I wonder if I can make this a little bit better, it's more of a curiosity. It's not like a make wrong, like I have to make this better. Or I should make this better. It's more like, ooh, I wonder if this really good joke could be even better. And when I keep an open mind, that beginner's mindset, it does get better. And I think that was a good lesson that I don't think I learned. I think I knew of it maybe in in other contexts, but it really got cemented through comedy.
I could ask you comedy questions all 30 minutes, but I'll try not to do that.
That's all right.
You have a one-person show currently touring. Is this the perfect child of speaking and comedy? How did that come about?
Yeah, it really is the perfect blend. It's really the hybrid. And in fact, once I wrote my one woman show, which I first performed back in 2019, then of course I took a break for the pandemic. But once I brought it out again, I really learned from my audiences. I knew that my show was more than an entertainment piece, that it had these really sticky universal life lessons. But once I started hearing more from audiences that the things that I talked about in my theater show were helping them in business and in their own personal relationships, and they learned something they really took away. There's some sticky sound bites that I use in my show, and I think that was eye-opening for me. I knew it was impactful, but until I heard the feedback from the audiences, I didn't really know the value and the power of what I had created. And now I'm actually delivering my keynotes with some stories and excerpts and even some costumes and props. So it really feels like you're at a theater show, but then we pull back the curtain and I let you see, and we have an actual interaction and a discussion about these lessons, and how do they apply, and how are they relevant in your life as a leader, as a sales professional. And that's where audiences really get a special type of performance. I don't want to say just a keynote, or like, I don't want to put my colleagues down, but it's a very different kind of a keynote experience. And it's perfect for opening a conference with, creating open minds in the audience and attendees, but it's also really fabulous to close out a conference when everybody's kind of full. They've got all this content. They've already got a whole page of to-dos, and they just want to kind of relax into an experience, but they still want it to be valuable and relevant.
I want to ask you about that because, believe it or not, I am a huge nerd myself. I love going to conferences for many different reasons, and I know that opening and that closing spot they're vital, that they are, as you explained it, the kickoff is going to set the tone for the next 2 or 3 days, or this has been great, we need to wrap it up. We need somebody who can really tie things together. So how did you land in one of those two spots? How did you work your way up to it? And do you present yourself there, or do they know, all right, we're getting Merit, she's going to open this off, this is what we need?
I think it was an evolution. I started my career on stages as a training expert, right? So I had sales expertise. I'm certified in emotional intelligence, and I had high content rich programs. And the evolution to being a keynoter is really about, why is this important? Why, it's inspirational, but it's got some juicy nuggets that you can take away and put into action. And those are my favorite types of keynotes. But keynoters are great storytellers. They're memorable in that way. Or maybe they have some big event or experience that everybody wants to know a little bit more about. And so I think, while I didn't climb Everest or gnaw off my arm, or I'm not a Navy SEAL, like there's I don't have these like wow factor stories. My stories are everyday human being stories, right? Like, I had a pretty decent childhood. I had a maybe rocky marriage, but it's like there weren't like these big awful things in the middle. And I think that's one of the reasons it's relatable. But what I've always been able to do very well is pull the lessons out of each experience and make sure that I'm choosing the experiences and the stories that are particularly relevant and useful for that particular audience. And I think that's what really resonates with my clients, and that they appreciate that, when they leave the program, it's not like, oh, that was interesting hearing her life story. It was, oh, I can see how that matters to me and how I can use that in my life to make things better.
And I think that last point there, that's the one that people love to hear stories. They're interested in it. But if you can tie it to a conclusion, a piece of advice, or something that becomes actionable, or, oh yeah, here's how I can apply that, it takes it to a whole new level, because something they're going to remember, and they're going to always tie that to you. So that makes sense. That's why you've got the closing spot.
I think one of my favorite things that happened recently, it was right after the pandemic. I was doing a program in Denver for a group of medical office managers. And there was a guy in my audience, and I had told some stories, some stories that I've been telling for a very long time. There was a guy in my audience, and he came up to me afterwards and he goes, were you from Chicago? Did you used to work in Chicago? And I said, well, yeah, I had a business in Chicago for, more than a dozen years. And he goes, I think it was in one of your programs. And I go, why, what makes you say that? And he said, I remembered that story about your dad and what your dad taught you. And I was like, oh my God. And that's perfect. I don't need you to remember me. I don't need you to remember my name. That would be nice. Those are all ego things. I want you to remember the story. I want you to remember 15 years later that story resonated with you, that it's been valuable for you, that you remembered it all these years later. And that was probably one of the best compliments. That's
a really good illustration of that point. Thank you for sharing that. Perfect. One thing that you've brought up with each of your kind of endeavors, or most of them, is audience. And I'm not going to be able to land this question, but it sounds really good in my mind, so I'm going to try. Ideally, from what we think, we want to tailor our content, our material, our delivery to the folks who are going to hear it. So when it's a speech, a keynote, you kind of know who's in the audience because the medical professional, you know that this is what they do for work. They're going to want to hear this. But at a comedy show, you have generally no idea who's in that crowd. So how do you do that for the comedy audience versus your tailored specific niche audience for a conference?
Yeah. And I'm happy that I learned that from sales. Always know your audience. That's sort of rule number one. Um, I didn't learn that quick enough in comedy, I will admit. And then they say every comedian bombs at least, you got to have your bomb, right? So I had mine in Toronto. And what happened was I was in Toronto for a week for a business event. And I thought, as long as I'm here, I'll go see if I can get some time on a comedy stage. And at that time, I was just going through my divorce. I was very new in comedy. I didn't have a ton of material, but I was writing about what was personal to me. And at that point in time, it was my difficult marriage. So I do this. I called this club and I get a few minutes on their stage. It's a Wednesday night. It's about 10:30 p.m. by the time I go up. Now, what I didn't think about at the time was who might be in the club on a Wednesday night at 10:30. And I promise you, it was not the old married people. It was the young 20-somethings who could, drink all night and still make it to work the next day. So as I'm doing my, isn't my husband a jerk marriage jokes, there's two women sitting right in the front row, and one leans to the other and says, gosh, her jokes are kind of mean. And I learned two things that night. Number one, Canadians are very nice. My jokes were very mean. That was not a good match. And two, you don't have to necessarily do a poll of the audience of who's here, but sometimes just by the time of day or where you are, where that club is, a downtown club is a quite a different audience from a suburban club or a rural club. And so there's certain things that you can somewhat generalize on, just by virtue of looking around. Pay attention to the comedians who are up prior to you. Ask the club owners, right? Like some of the same things I would teach my sales or leadership people to do. Like do a little homework, right? In business, I would say, go on LinkedIn and find out a little bit about their business, do a little searching, ask people who might know them. What can you tell me about this person, this audience that you'll be in front of trying to do a good pitch? So there's a lot of similarities between sales and leadership and comedy, and making sure that your messages really stick. And now I have enough comedy that when I take a look at an audience, for example, I perform a lot with a group called Moms Unhinged, and most of our audiences are mothers of various ages, but we can all laugh and relate to humor about kids and motherhood. So I'm going to do more of my humor in that category for that audience, because that's going to really they're going to just go crazy for it. And then I'm going to do some of my dating stuff or some of my other stuff for younger audiences, downtown clubs. So I've learned a lot in my comedy experience.
I'm glad, because I never would have thought, where is the club? What's the setting to think? But as you describe it, just like doing your homework for a sales call, which you did, I never would have put those two together. So thank you for tying that. Sure. Let's say someone is listening to this and they've had it on their bucket list. I'm asking for a friend to do an open mic because they want to do comedy and they're dying for it, but they should probably think of something beforehand. What should they know before they go up there, as far as something that's how long their set should be, where it should be, a joke they should tell, shouldn't tell? What's one piece of advice you can give that person?
Well, first of all, comedy is really about writing, right? Well, there's a couple philosophies. For me, I write. I write. I write every day. I write about things that are personal to me, things that I've observed. And then I ask myself, why did I observe that? And so there's certain questions that comedians have learned to ask themselves to find funny in any day situations. Other people are just, like they're out with their friends and they're riffing and they're saying something funny, and that's their material, and they don't write anything down. And so there's not really a right or wrong way to do it. I would say if you're itching to try it, just go try it, right? Like find an open mic and find out first, how much time do I get? I would start with something very small. 5 minutes feels like a very, very, very long time when it's your first time. Go up and tell a few jokes. Go and do 2 minutes. It's, that'll give you enough of a taste to know whether or not you want to do this anymore. But the other thing that people don't often think of, because they normally go first to like, oh, I got to do an open mic. I would do find a comedy writing class, or start a comedy writing habit. And the more more material you have written, the more you have to pull together to do a set at an open mic. And that's what I did. I took a 6-week writing class first, and then I took a comedy workshop, which at the culmination of the class was stage time.
I couldn't imagine anything funnier than sitting in a comedy class with a bunch of people trying to do this for the first time. Just, it must be a great camaraderie and amazing experience.
Would think, I don't want to burst your bubble, Mike,
no.
but my comedy class was the least funny thing I have ever done. It was terrifying. And also that particular coach, her name's Christina Hall, my first coach, and her brand of comedy was very personal comedy. So she really wanted to pull out of you. It was almost like therapy. Like, she pulled out of you, like, what is it you're afraid to say? And you have never said on a stage or in public. What's something you could reveal about yourself? And that was absolutely terrifying. But I also think it created a great breakthrough for me on all of the stages I'm on in my life. And it made me a better keynote speaker. It made me a better storyteller. It made me more vulnerable with my audiences, and therefore more relatable. And I'm eternally grateful for what I learned in that class, but it really wasn't funny. It was hard.
Well, that was exactly what I thought. I'm glad you said more relatable, because as you said that, I was like, well, how is that going to make you funnier? But the more relatable piece, that makes sense. So thank you for that. So life on the road with the show, what is that like? What do you have a typical day, or what does that look like while you're touring?
Well, I'm just in the beginning, early stages of touring. I've done a few shows in Denver. I just did 4 shows in a row in Chicago. That was a whole experience and energy that it takes for 4 back-to-back shows. In a couple of weeks, I'll be in New York, November 18th in Pelham, New York, at the Manor Club of Pelham. And then for me, my touring is a little unique, right? So the thing that pays the bills is the keynoting. And so I build my touring schedule for my theater show and my comedy clubs around my keynote performances. So I've got, that's why I'm doing the show in New York, because I'm doing a keynote and a workshop session for a group of accountants in Connecticut. And so as soon as I get booked for a keynote, then I look around and I say, okay, where's a place that is my kind of audience? My show is maybe not such a downtown theater experience. It's a suburban crowd. It's people like me, right, who really love my show. So I'm going to look for the right venues to perform, and then I'm basically right now producing my own show, which means I am finding the theaters, doing the contracts, shipping the set, right, selling the tickets, doing the marketing. It's a lot. So if anybody's listening and they want to be, they want to be my tour manager or produce my show, I'm all ears. Those are the first things I want to get rid of.
You're taking the term one woman to a whole new level with that. That's a lot.
It is a lot to produce our show. Yeah.
So you mentioned coming up, Manor Club in New York, Pelham, New York, November 18th. We talked a little bit. You also have the next show is in Colorado.
So I do regular shows in Colorado because
Okay.
I have a regular space where I get to perform. So that's easy. I am looking at doing some shows in Florida first quarter. And again, I'm looking at my keynote schedule. So now that I let that fill in first, and then I see, where am I going to be? I'll probably do a show in Orlando in December because I'm going to be there for a work event. And, the tour kind of fills in.
Okay. All right. And
of course, if there's a theater that wants to just pay me to bring the show, and that's what the New York deal is, by the way. So that's kind of nice when a theater just says, we want your show. We know we can sell tickets. Yeah, all in on those deals.
So there you go. If you're listening to this and you want to produce a show, sell tickets, or pay a top-notch comedian, please get in touch with Merit. Somehow we are almost on time. I do have a couple follow-up questions or quick hitters here. I asked you about starting comedy, which I'm sure there are some of us out there, but there's a lot more people, I would assume, who are maybe they're training and want to become a speaker, want to make that jump to a keynote, or just find a stage to speak on. Just start is good advice. But how do you get in front of an audience when you don't have that experience? Where's a good place to start there?
I think a lot of my colleagues and I have started with, some of the business meetings that are happening locally in your town, right? There's a Rotary Club, there's networking events, there's Chamber of Commerce opportunities. So there's Toastmasters groups where you can hone your skills. There's the National Speakers Association, which is a wonderful association where you can learn not just about the craft of speaking, but also the business side. And I think all of those are great places to begin. Any stage time is good stage time, but I think most importantly, before you go and you get enticed by, the being on a stage part of it, make sure you have something worth listening to. You're going to get, because otherwise what happens is you get quickly frustrated because it's an effort. It's a big effort to get the stage time. But if you are relevant and interesting and entertaining, and you have something of value to share, then it doesn't matter if you're great on stage right at the beginning, because if your message is good enough, you'll get more stages and then you'll get better. And I think that's really, the most important thing to focus on is have something relevant to say, and say it in an entertaining way.
That's big. Have material that's worth listening to, have content that fits that bucket. That's wonderful advice. I have jumped around a ton, but I'm sure there's something I didn't ask you that I should have. What is that?
Well, let's see. You could ask me something deep like my philosophy on life or something like that, which I think really comes down to a quick story that I do tell in my show. It's actually the title of my show is called Who Chiseled That? And it comes from something that my father said growing up. Anytime I told my father something wasn't possible, like, I'll never make the cheerleading team. I'm too young to be a sales manager. I don't have what it takes to be a business owner. It could be anything. And he said it throughout my life. And anytime I told him one of those things, he would say, "Who chiseled that over the door?" Which I think was his version of who carved that in stone. I don't know. But what I learned from that was to challenge assumptions, to really ask myself better questions anytime I was facing an obstacle, anytime I hadn't done anything and I wasn't sure how, like producing a show. I didn't know how to do that. There's not really a class in that. And so, or like writing, performing and producing a one-woman show, like I didn't have a blueprint to follow. So I just figured it out. And that was, that's just really run my entire life. And it's the foundation of everything that I teach is, just because somebody tells you something isn't possible doesn't mean they're right. And I think the other piece of that I learned is, they say that tragedy plus time equals comedy, but nobody said it had to take a long time. So if you could shorten the time frame between tragedy and, if you could shorten that one element of the equation and you can get to the comedy faster, life just looks a lot better.
And I think that's my takeaway from this excellent conversation. The who chiseled that story, that whether or not that's what the audience member recognized from working with you before, but that's wonderful advice. And someone who wants to do different things, there's not going to be a blueprint for that, but having that, just because it's not out there, I can still, carve my own path. I can go out there and do it. That's the way you have to do it and kind of forge ahead. So I love it. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been an absolute blast. Merit, where can our listeners find you if they want to learn more or get tickets for the show?
Sure. The hub of all things is meritkahn.com. That's MERITKAHN.com. And there you'll see the 3 different stages, and just push the button for the stage you are most interested in. And on the theater and the comedy page, you'll see an area for tickets and tours and all that information, and some really fun workshops that I've got coming up. I'm collaborating with a confidence coach, and we're doing a confidence and comedy event in February in North Carolina. And I've just got a lot of fun, exciting things coming up. So check it out and get on the list.
Excellent. So we will post all that. Merit, thank you so much for joining. This has been really fun.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.